Memorial Day is a day to remember and honor America's military men and women who lost their lives in service to their country. And how is that done here? Through commercialization of the holiday by giving consumers discounts on mattresses, clothes, and electronics. Pools and beaches open all across the country. There's backyard barbecues where people shove their faces full of burgers, franks, and potato salad. And of course, the summer box office kicks off with a big studio film. It is one of the rare holidays that the horror genre has not really exploited like others. After all, we do have 20+ horror Easter and 4th of July horror films. Heck, we even have one for President's Day. Now, there is a small handful of horror films related to Memorial Day, but none of them make our list. Instead, we are diving into the trenches looking for military-themed horror movies, and here are 5 horror movies to watch during Memorial Day that you may not have,
or probably,
heard of.
Number 5. While it is not a feature-length film, coming in at 58 minutes and being a part of the Masters of Horror series from the early 2000s, the only thing that ages in Joe Dante's Homecoming is the cell phones. Some people may be triggered by watching this one because it shows the more things change, the more they stay the same. Homecoming takes place during a presidential election where a candidate tries to sell people on the smoke and mirrors that most politicians tend to promise and not do. This candidate tries to cash in on the blood of our soldiers with a campaign speech that if he had one wish, he would wish for every son to come back from fighting for their country overseas. It isn't long before we see a variation of his wish come true as the fallen sons of our nation begin to rise, but not with the intent of eating brains, but instead they have returned to vote. At first, one of the political parties celebrates their return on a cable news show promoting that they earned their right to vote. But when they learn that the undead is supporting the other party, as expected, they quickly turn on the veterans and resort to childish name-calling. Homecoming is not your typical zombie film filled with blood and gore. It's a fresh take on the apocalypse where we are forced to look into the mirror at who the real villains are when it comes to war and how it is sold to us. Number 4.
Have you ever wondered what would happen if a werewolf crossed paths with a grizzled Vietnam vet? If you are like me, you have to figure that the werewolf is at a severe disadvantage and it has hunted its last prey. Late Phases understands that the werewolf is not the big bad in the film, the veteran is, so they handicap him by making him blind, and not the type of blind where a person can still see some shadow movement. It's the old man from Don't Breathe blind, where our veteran has to feel his way around when he's in an unfamiliar territory. Which essentially is the whole movie for our protagonist, as Ambrose has just moved into a retirement community. In this horror drama, Ambrose has to deal with a complex relationship with his son while he begins to learn about the town's dark secret, where the residents' dogs tend to go missing fairly often, and then once a month, people are attacked by a creature living in the nearby woods. After he is attacked in his home by the creature, Ambrose quickly pieces together that the attacks only occur when there is a full moon and begins to prepare for the creature's return. Late Phases is a slow burn carried by Ambrose, as you can't help wanting to know what is in store for him and what he will do next, as some high society busybodies try to ostracize him from the community.
Number 3. Our next pick on this list is one that the soldiers are not to be celebrated for what they did for their country, but instead cheered as they are killed off for a second time. Dead Snow is a Norwegian horror comedy that follows a group of friends who head to a cabin in the woods for the weekend on a ski trip. But their plans take a turn when they discover a hidden box of gold coins hidden beneath the floorboard of their cabin, which awakens a platoon of dead Nazis that are hell-bent on getting back what belongs to them. The characters in the film are aware of horror movies and at times make references to horror tropes that they accidentally stumble into or do themselves, and that they should heed it as a warning. Dead Snow is chock full of zombie gore, dead Nazis, which is always a plus, and fun references to films that came before it, including one where one of our protagonists has to conjure his best Ash Williams impersonation and fight off the horde of zombies with a chainsaw. Number 2.
During the peak of slasher films in 1981, not only were movie studios pumping out films to theaters, but TV networks attempted to cash in as well. There were 30 slasher films released in 1981, and The Prowler, like one of my personal favorites from that year, My Bloody Valentine, tends to get lost in the mix of slasher films. It wouldn't be a slasher film if we weren't following a group of students, and in The Prowler, the students are stalked and murdered during a graduation party by a killer dressed in a military uniform. The killer is suspected to be World War II veteran George Fraser, who has returned to go on a killing spree on the 35th anniversary of the murder of his ex-girlfriend, who he found with another man when he returned from the war in 1945 and decided to let out his frustration with a pitchfork. The Prowler is one of Tom Savini's practical effects masterpieces, and it is one of his own personal favorites, as they are a step up from what we saw a year prior in Friday the 13th. The Prowler's motives and kills are more visceral and vengeful than Mrs. Voorhees, and if you watch this slasher film for the kills, then you will be giddy by the end of it.
Number 1. From the vision of rising star Joe Begos, VFW is an action-packed throwback love letter to the 80s horror films in story, style of filming, music, and story elements. When a local gang watches one of its members jump off of a balcony when their leader, Boz, tosses a bag of drugs from it just to watch her leap after it. She falls to her death in front of her younger sister, Lizard, which prompts her to seek revenge by doing the one thing that will impact Boz the most: steal his stash. However, she is caught in the act and manages to escape and flee to a nearby VFW that is serving its last round for the night. Boz's gang quickly descends upon the bar, not only intent on getting his stash back and killing Lizard, but killing anyone who stands in their way. Unfortunately for them, they entered the wrong bar with a group of grizzled vets not afraid to deliver their own brand of hellfire on them. Stephen Lang from Don't Breathe plays Fred the bartender and leads his brothers in arms against the gang in this blood-soaked, nostalgic thrill ride that packs everything you missed about great 80s horror films.
Now, I don't remember if you saw Homecoming when it first came out. I did. And it's been a while since I've seen it because it's almost 2 decades since it first came out. And I don't remember the story the way it was as it is now. And it's probably because our country and a lot of the countries in the world have gone through this massive dumbing down of politics and social media and news media. So it's just funny to see that something that came out so long ago probably was happening back then and we just didn't realize it because we didn't really watch news or pay attention to stuff. And here it is, it's still relevant today.
I think that I did watch it when it first came out. But, you know, back when I was a teenager, late teen, early 20s, mid 20s, you know, the biggest, you know, horrifying story that was going around with politics was that Bill Clinton, you know, did do his secretary. And that was like the biggest thing, right? And then there was like bumper stickers that said no one died when Clinton lied, and that was it. Now it's so much worse with politics and everything that's gone on, and we're not going to get into it because that'll be very heated. But I call it a movie. I know it's only 58 minutes, but it's a movie. It makes a lot more sense now.
One of the coolest scenes in this movie, even though there's not a lot of gore in it and there is some political, themes to it, is when the dead starts to rise. There's a scene where they're sitting up with the American flag on, and it's like, wow, that's just a cool scene, and I don't think I've ever seen it done before.
It is really cool, and I actually really like the part when they start showing the dead veterans go in and putting their votes in, because it's actually really like,
it fits the story perfectly.
It fits the story, but it actually is a very emotional thing to watch, especially when you're watching something that's horror, but it is very emotional to think that, had they been able to get that vote in, it would have been so much different.
Emotion or horror is emotion. I've said it on a couple other shows.
That's true. It is.
Now, Late Phases, not only was this guy a Vietnam vet, but he is true a New Yorker, probably from Brooklyn or the Bronx, because that's the kind of voice and mannerisms that he has. So, me being from that and watching him on screen, he actually kind of reminds me of Stephen Dash a little bit. And it's like, oh man, this guy's entertaining. So while it does slow down in the middle of the movie for a little bit, and you're like, man, I just want to see what is he gonna do?
But he doesn't disappoint. Even when the movie or like the horror aspect of it slows down, Nick D'Amici doesn't disappoint. He first of all, he's really fucking funny. He plays a blind man very well. Like, I don't know how much like research and like things he did, but he's not blind. He did play it really well.
He said that was one of the most difficult things that he ever did, because he's like, my eyes are open, I can still see, but I have to figure out how to act this way.
Yeah. And it was great because the expression that he had on his face really, and the way that he would like turn his eyes kind of off to the side so it looked like he wasn't focusing on anything, looked so real. And I loved how he always put those Karens in their place.
It's definitely an entertaining film to at least watch once. There's very few werewolf movies that are very good or have good wolf effects or transformations. This one's pretty decent, but again, story's pretty decent. Ambrose, Nick D'Amici, very good. He's worth watching and checking out at least once.
And some of you will recognize who plays his son. It is Ethan Embry, who was in movies like Sweet Home Alabama and Can't Hardly Wait. So, you'll recognize. Oh, and he also did have a small part in The Walking Dead. He didn't survive. But he was in it.
The other movies on this list are great as well. I love VFW. And I've talked about this on multiple shows with Driven and Last Night in Soho. I just love the colors are being used in this.
The colors are very much like Driven and Last Night in Soho, especially Last Night in Soho. The colors are very much like that, even though they're not even in the same time period, because you have one that's shooting for the 80s, and then Last Night in Soho is taking you back to the 60s. The colors are very similar. And, I mean, Stephen Lang, come on, that dude is like... And then you have Martin Cove, right? So, I mean, we all know who that is.
That entire movie is stacked with great people. You got William Sattler in it. You have Fred Williamson in it. It's just a great movie just to see these guys kicking ass. But just to go back to Joe Bagos really quickly, if you've just seen recently the Bloody Christmas movie, same guy directed it. So
again, same color concepts too.
Yeah.
So he's clearly an 80s fan. My kind of guy. So, yeah, because the colors really scream 80s when you're looking at it.
Yep. Dead to Know, if you watch that, it's got a sequel, so go and check that one out. And then Prowler, like I said with My Bloody Valentine, a great slasher film that is highly underrated, gets lost in the mix of all the slasher films, not only that came out in that year, but that entire decade of slasher films. Doesn't get the credit that it deserves. Definitely not only a watch, but a purchase and own.
I mean, come on. When you're going back to like the 80s, I think a lot of these films don't get the recognition they deserve because of what they went up against.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you have Halloween coming, obviously they're on to like the second or third one by that point, and you have the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise and the Friday the 13th franchise. So you have these bigger franchises, right? And then you have these smaller horror movies that come in like Prowler and My Bloody Valentine, and I just don't think that they ever got the love that they deserved because of those franchises.
Yeah, even Tourist Trap.
Yeah, that too. That one was definitely lost and like pushed under the rug, and people didn't even know it existed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of those movies really did, because you had those movie franchises that were already well into their second, third, going into their fourth possibly film at that point, so people were really focused on those.
Yes, so what military horror movies are you watching this upcoming holiday? Let us know by dropping it in the comments.
Yeah.
And there's a couple things you need to do, right? So you need to
like, subscribe, comment, share, all of the good stuff.
And win stuff. Every single video, we're going to be giving away things at 25, 50, 75, and 100 comments. At 3,000 subscribers, 4,000 subscribers, and 5,000 subscribers, we'll be giving out a lot of cool things. Yeah. Anyway, until the next Pop 5,
see ya.